So this week we're talking about language is hard, right? I talked to you about getting specific with our language and telling readers what we mean when presenting language that's unspecific or that allows for multiple interpretations. We said there's what we say, there's what we mean. We care about what we mean. Sometimes what we say makes it blurry or hard to figure out what we mean. Two ways we do that is we're vague or we're ambiguous. Or that's to say we use vagueness or ambiguity purposefully or accidentally. Some people do purposefully use these tools to make it hard for you to understand what they mean so they can retreat to other interpretations. So I told you the solutions, right? That's what you do when you're trying to figure out what someone means or where you think it might be hard to tell what you mean. Today we're going to be talking though about how to choose words. We have to actually go, okay, but why are we even using those words? So we're going to be talking about how we define our language. So we're going to be talking about definitions. What is a definition? You probably think a definition is you open up a dictionary and you look at how does it define or how does it explain the way a word is used. Take that idea of what definitions are and put it aside. This idea that there are set principled definitions that are somehow above our language is kind of newfangled and only exists in like Europe and like in places that take from their understanding of language or who take language from European imperialism. A definition is the thing that a word means, right? We said there is what we say and what we mean, and definitions are trying to identify the thing that we mean, right? What's a descriptive definition? It's the thing that dictionaries do. Many of you might already know, or you might learn, that it's not a good thing in law and philosophy when you're discussing ideas with people. It's not a good thing in most fields to rely on dictionary definitions to prove points, because the idea is actually like the opinions and things we believe will just change what the dictionaries say. You know, when y'all and ain't became words in dictionaries, it was super controversial. You can ask my mom, for example, like she found that so unbelievable that these words that were non-stand or words that were considered informal or inappropriate for formal discourse, that those started to become recognized by dictionaries was something a lot of, I think, our parents responded to because they were taught, you know, never use this language. And that's because the dictionaries of the world, especially here in the United States, our dictionary companies want to describe what words mean when people use them. The standard that Merriam-Webster or Oxford Dictionary have decided to pick up, or dictionary.com, have decided to pick up when they've done the project of defining what words mean through dictionaries, the decision they made was, I want to describe how this word is used in the world. And that's what dictionaries do, is they're describing how words are used in the world. That is helpful if you just literally don't know what a word means and you want to know what people usually mean when they say that word. If you don't understand a word differently and you're using a definition and I'm using a different definition, by saying, well, the dictionary says this is the definition of this word, so you're wrong, is useless. Because I have said, I've interpreted the world and I understand this to be true. The language I use to describe it is this. That is how I'm defining it. To use a dictionary and say, well, this person says most people don't use it that way is ridiculous. You're arguing language. You're policing how someone decided to tell you their idea. You've done nothing to actually deal with the idea at hand. Here's a good example. If you and I were having a debate about if a hot dog is a sandwich, and you said, well, here's the definition of a sandwich. If I say, I actually just don't think that's the definition of a sandwich, your argument's falling apart. That might be helpful if you and I share the same definition of a sandwich, and now we are arguing about this shared definition's relevance to our conversation. But if you just try to say, well, here's what Merriam-Webster says, or here's what the dictionary says, you're wrong. That might be fun and lighthearted for a debate about if hot dogs are sandwiches. But if it's something like, should we vote for this policy for our country? That would be ridiculous, right? There's a different type of definition called stipulative or prescriptive definitions. Our author This is the word stipulative because stipulative definitions is the word we use in philosophy. Stipulating a definition is, to stipulate means to say, for my purposes, I mean this, right? To stipulate. In this situation, here's what I mean is to do a stipulation. Prescriptive is saying like prescribing or saying here's how the word should be used. This term is more used in like linguistics or in language. I'm going to define it as describes what a word means for the example. So if I wanted to say something is viral, and by viral I mean it is literally transmitted through a virus, I would stipulate. I would say, this thing seems to me to be viral. And by viral, I stipulate or I mean a thing that is literally transmitted through a virus entering from one organism into another, which is different than viral as it means this TikTok is going viral. So what a stipulative definition is saying, in this case, I mean this. Both of these ways of defining words have purposes. I would say if no one understood what I meant, here's what I am trying to say, or here's what I intended for you to understand in my definition. Versus if I was reading a book and I didn't know what an author meant by these words, now you are defining language by describing the way that I am using it. There's a distinction there. We can either describe the way someone is using language, and that's something you do as a person looking at language, or you can, as the person creating language, say, here's what I mean by this. Descriptive definitions are saying, here's how this person is using that word. Prescriptive definitions are saying, here's how I'm using this word. But these definitions still have the same problems from earlier. These can still be vague, right? The example that was given in our book was currency is anything of value. If I open up a dictionary and it said currency is anything of value, it would be unspecific. It would be broad. It would be a broad definition. It would be a definition that is vague, right? Anything of value really is currency. I value my mom. Is my mom currency? No. So we need to make sure when we're defining things, whether we're describing it or we are stipulating it for our audience, that we don't suddenly become vague again. That's called a broad definition. And all broad definitions are definitions that are vague. The word is doing the same thing vague was doing in our last lecture. The last thing a definition can be is argumentative. What's an argumentative definition? An argumentative definition is when a person presents their ideology in the definition. If I disliked abortion and I defined abortion as the immoral act of ending the life of a fetus, if I am literally just putting my argument into my definition, then I'm not defining my word, right? You don't want to do this, because if you are just putting your argument in your definition, the definition has not helped your person understand what you mean. Because now you have fused together the thing you believe about the word with the actual thing itself. You have to try and remove as much ideology as possible from your definition, because you want your definition to be something that even a person who disagrees with you can work with. That's called a neutral definition. Opposite of an argumentative definition is a neutral definition. Definitions can be descriptive or stipulative. They can be argumentative or neutral. This is all true. We don't want argumentative definitions because those are baked in with ideology. The way you counter argumentative definitions is by stripping out all your ideology and giving a neutral definition. That's a definition that people who disagree with you about your argument could still agree with, is describing the subject of your argument. Descriptive definitions are people describing how a word was used in a certain context, or for dictionaries, the context of just everywhere the language is used. Prescriptive or stipulative definitions are when you as the speaker, the author, whatever you are, if you are posing the definition, you are saying, in my example right here, here's what I mean. There's also these things called conditions, and conditions are helpful because they describe things that make words mean what they mean. Good example, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, PB&J. You could not have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich without peanut butter and jelly. Those things are required for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. These are called necessary conditions, right? Necessary conditions are the things that need to be present in order for your word to mean what you mean. So peanut butter is a necessary condition of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's something that is necessary in order for you to understand the subject I'm defining. If I were to describe to you the human process of breathing, a necessary condition is the consumption of oxygen, right? It is impossible to imagine a human breathing without the consumption of oxygen. That's different than a sufficient condition. Let me show you that example. Rabbits are mammals. Being a rabbit is enough in order to be considered a mammal because rabbits have the characteristics of mammals. I am not a rabbit, but I am still a mammal. This is called a sufficient condition. To be a rabbit is sufficient enough in order to be a mammal. If you are a rabbit, you are a mammal. It is not the only way, though, importantly, of being a mammal. You could not make a peanut butter jelly sandwich without peanut butter and jelly. These things were necessary in order to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich. Therefore, peanut butter and jelly are both necessary conditions of a peanut butter jelly sandwich. Being a rabbit is sufficient to be a mammal, but it is not the only way to be a mammal. So a rabbit is a sufficient condition of being a mammal, but it is not the only way to be a mammal. If I was caught committing a crime right now, that is a sufficient condition of being arrested. It's not the only way I could be arrested, right? It's not necessary that I get caught committing the act in order to eventually be arrested for it. That's the difference between conditions, right? Why do you need to know what a condition is? Well, because I could say, I'm making an argument about what sandwiches are. An example of a sandwich is a peanut butter jelly sandwich, and there are a few necessary parts of a peanut butter jelly sandwich. Let's say I think the necessary parts are bread, peanut butter, and jelly. People can disagree with definitions, just like they can disagree with the fact that bread might not be necessary for a sandwich. I might be defining my word and say, well, what does it mean to be a peanut butter jelly sandwich? There are a few things you have to be in order to be a peanut butter jelly sandwich. Namely, you have to have peanut butter and jelly. So if there is no peanut butter available, it's impossible to have a peanut butter jelly sandwich. That's a way of defining language. I've said the actual defining the thing I mean requires a few necessary components. Those components are called conditions. It is possible to be this thing under the condition that. Those conditions could either be necessary, it would be impossible to be the thing unless you have the necessary conditions, or there might be a lot of ways that you can become this thing. There's a lot of ways of being a mammal. There's a lot of ways of being an American. There's a lot of ways of being arrested, right? And there are different pathways. Those different pathways are called sufficient conditions, because at some point you've done enough in order to be considered the thing, the mammal, the American, arrested, right? Those different pathways are each independently sufficient ways of getting to the same thing, which is mammal, American, person arrested. I might define Americans or mammals or people that are arrested in a lot of different ways. The component parts that make up those ways of reaching that thing I referred to in the word mammal, in the word American, and in the word arrested, those different pathways are independently sufficient conditions. There might be both. A necessary condition might be for being an American, you might need to be registered with the country of the United States of America, right? That might be a necessary condition. But being born here is a sufficient condition because it is not the only way that one becomes American. If it was the only way, or if it was necessary you were born here, it would be a necessary condition. But that's not the case, so it is sufficient. It's just one of the ways, but not the only way, to become an American.